Sometimes, the most dangerous secrets hide behind the most ordinary faces. In a world where heroes wear uniforms and medals tell stories of valor, what happens when someone claims a glory that isn't theirs? Astro crowds. But what if the person everyone believes is lying is actually telling a truth so classified that even admitting it could cost them everything? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman who walked into a military recruitment office one ordinary Tuesday morning and walked out in handcuffs, accused of stolen valor and impersonating a Navy SEAL. For 3 days, she sat in a holding cell while the internet exploded with outrage. Her mugshot shared millions of times with captions calling her a fraud, a liar, a disgrace to real heroes. But sometimes, the most incredible lies turn out to be the most dangerous truths. And sometimes the people who seem like frauds are actually the ones who've sacrificed everything for secrets the world can never know. Sarah Mitchell had always been good at blending in. At 32, she possessed the kind of unremarkable beauty that made people forget her face the moment she left the room. Average height, brown hair often pulled back in a simple ponytail, clothes that never drew attention. She preferred it that way. Anonymity had become her greatest asset over the years. That Tuesday morning in downtown Portland felt different, though. As she walked through the glass doors of the military recruitment center, something inside her chest tightened. The familiar weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible burden she'd been carrying for months. The recruitment office buzzed with typical morning activity. Young men and women filled out paperwork, their faces bright with dreams of service and adventure. Recruiters moved between desks, their pressed uniforms crisp and authoritative. The smell of coffee and anticipation filled the air. Sarah approached the front desk where a young Marine corporal sat reviewing files. He looked up with a practiced smile, the kind that had welcomed thousands of potential recruits. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with someone about my military record," Sarah said quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. "There's been some confusion about my service history." The corporal's eyebrows raised slightly. "What kind of confusion?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm a Navy SEAL. I completed training at Bud/S in 2018, and I've been on active duty for the past 4 years. But according to your records, I don't exist." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, conversations continued, but Sarah noticed how the corporal's expression shifted from friendly professionalism to skeptical concern. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to repeat that." "I said I'm a Navy SEAL." "Sarah Mitchell, service number 2847391. I graduated from basic underwater demolition training 4 years ago, and I've been serving in classified operations since then." The corporal stared at her for a long moment. Sarah knew how she looked, knew how unbelievable her claims seemed. She was too small, too ordinary, too female for most people's idea of what a SEAL should be. The military had only recently opened SEAL training to women, and successful female graduates remained extremely rare. "Ma'am, you're going to need to wait here while I get my supervisor." Sarah nodded and took a seat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall. She watched as the corporal made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones while glancing in her direction. Other people in the waiting area began to notice the commotion. Whispers started spreading through the room. Within minutes, a stern-faced sergeant emerged from a back office. He was a large man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. His nameplate read Martinez. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Sergeant Martinez. I understand you're claiming to be a Navy SEAL." "I'm not claiming to be anything. I am a Navy SEAL." Martinez sat down across from her, his expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I've been in the military for 20 years. I know most of the SEALs who come through this area. I've never seen you before. That's because my operations are classified. I can't discuss the details of my missions or the units I've worked with." "Convenient," Martinez said, but not unkindly. "Ma'am, stolen valor is a serious federal crime. Impersonating military personnel, especially elite forces like the SEALs, can result in significant jail time and fines." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand that, Sergeant. I also understand that what I'm telling you sounds impossible, but I'm not lying." Martinez pulled out a tablet and began typing. "Let's start with the basics. When and where did you complete Bud/S training?" "Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California. I graduated with Class 348 in September 2018. Martinez's fingers moved quickly across the screen. Sarah watched his expression change as he searched through official records. His frown deepened. "Ma'am, according to Navy records, Class 348 had 37 graduates, all male. There's no Sarah Mitchell listed anywhere in the SEAL training databases." Check again, Sarah said quietly. Maybe under a different classification level. Ma'am, I have access to all the standard military databases. If you were a SEAL, your basic information would be in here somewhere. By now, several other people in the recruitment office had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange. Someone had their phone out, probably recording. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of being observed, evaluated, judged. Sergeant Martinez, I need you to make a phone call. Contact Naval Special Warfare Command in San Diego. Ask to speak with Admiral Patricia Hendricks. Tell her that Sarah Mitchell is requesting verification of her status. Martinez looked at her skeptically. Ma'am, I can't just call up flag officers because someone claims to know them. Then call the main number and ask them to verify my service record using my full name and service number. Tell them it's regarding a classification issue. Something in Sarah's tone, the specificity of her instructions, gave Martinez pause. He studied her face more carefully, looking for signs of deception or delusion. What he saw was calm determination and a strange sort of sadness. Ma'am, I'm going to give you one more chance to reconsider your story. Stolen valor charges are serious business. If you're having some kind of mental health crisis, we can get you help instead. Sarah appreciated his attempt at kindness, but she shook her head. I'm not having a breakdown, Sergeant. I'm exactly who I say I am. But I understand you have to follow protocol. Martinez sighed and stood up. Ma'am, I'm going to have to place you under citizen's arrest pending investigation by military police. You have the right to remain silent. As he spoke the familiar words, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. For months she had been trapped between two impossible choices. Continue living a lie that was slowly destroying her, or tell a truth that nobody would believe. She had chosen truth, even knowing it would lead to this moment. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet recruitment office. Every face in the room stared at her with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. Someone was definitely recording now, probably multiple people. Is there anyone you'd like us to call? Martinez asked as he led her toward the door. My sister Jennifer Mitchell, in Seattle. She's a nurse at Harborview Medical Center. As they walked through the parking lot toward Martinez's vehicle, Sarah caught sight of herself in the reflection of a car window. She looked exactly like what she was being accused of being. A fraud, a wannabe, a civilian playing dress-up in someone else's glory. But appearances had always been deceiving in her line of work. The best operatives were the ones nobody suspected, the ones who could walk through the world invisible and unremarkable. Sarah had spent years perfecting that skill, never imagining it would one day work against her so completely. The ride to the police station passed in silence. Martinez occasionally glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression thoughtful. Sarah stared out the window at the familiar streets of Portland, wondering if this would be the last time she saw them as a free woman. At the station, the booking process unfolded with mechanical efficiency. Fingerprints, photos, personal belongings inventoried and sealed in plastic bags. The desk sergeant who processed her paperwork shook his head in disgust. Another wannabe hero, he muttered. Why do they always pick the SEALs? Sarah said nothing. She had learned long ago that some battles couldn't be won with words. Her cell was small and clean, with a narrow bed and a metal toilet. Through the single-barred window, she could see a slice of grey Portland sky. She sat on the bed and closed her eyes, letting her mind drift to the missions that had brought her to this point. The hostage rescue in Somalia, where she had spent 3 days embedded with local forces, gathering intelligence while pretending to be an aid worker. The counter-terrorism operation in Eastern Europe, where her language skills and unremarkable appearance had allowed her to infiltrate a cell planning attacks on American installations. The classified mission she could never speak about, not even to defend herself. Each operation had required her to become someone else, to disappear into a role so completely that even she sometimes forgot where Sarah Mitchell ended and the mission began. But now, sitting in this cell accused of being a fraud, she realized she had lost something essential in all that shape-shifting. She had forgotten how to prove she was real. Hours passed. Through the small window, she watched the sky darken from grey to black. Occasionally, officers would walk by her cell, some pointing and whispering. Word had spread quickly through the station about the woman who claimed to be a Navy SEAL. Around 10 o'clock that evening, a different officer approached her cell. He was older, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen enough to reserve judgment. Miss Mitchell? I'm Detective Rodriguez. I'll be handling your case. Sarah stood and walked to the bars. Detective, I've been reviewing your statement from this afternoon. I have to say, it's pretty detailed for someone making things up. That's because I'm not making anything up. Rodriguez consulted his notes. You mentioned specific dates, locations, even gave a service number. Most people trying to fake military service don't do that level of homework. Most people aren't trained to maintain cover stories under pressure. The detective raised an eyebrow. Are you saying you're trained to maintain cover stories? Sarah met his gaze. I'm saying that if I were the kind of person who could successfully impersonate a Navy SEAL, I would probably be exactly the kind of person the Navy SEALs would want to recruit. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of her statement. Miss Mitchell, I've made some calls. I spoke with Naval Special Warfare Command. They have no record of anyone by your name in their systems. What level of clearance does your contact have? I'm sorry? The person you spoke with at NSW Command. What's their security clearance level? Because my records aren't accessible through standard channels. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I'm just a city detective. I don't know anything about security clearances. Sarah nodded. Detective Rodriguez, I need you to do me a favor. Call the FBI field office in Portland. Ask to speak with someone in their counterterrorism division. Tell them you have a woman in custody who claims to be a classified Navy SEAL operative and that she's requesting verification through proper channels. Mitchell, that's not really how things work. It is if what I'm telling you is true. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment. There was something in her manner, a calmness under pressure that didn't fit the profile of someone suffering from delusions or trying to scam the system. I'll see what I can do, he said finally. But ma'am, if this is some kind of elaborate con game, you're going to be in serious trouble. Detective, if what I'm telling you is true, I'm already in serious trouble. The question is whether it's the kind of trouble that ends with me in federal prison, or the kind that ends with some very uncomfortable conversations between various government agencies. As Rodriguez walked away, Sarah returned to her narrow bed. Through the walls she could hear the sounds of the station at night, phones ringing, distant conversations, the occasional drunk being processed in the next room. She thought about her sister Jennifer, who probably knew about the arrest by now. Jennifer, who believed Sarah worked as a translator for a government contractor, who had no idea her quiet, unremarkable sister had spent the last 4 years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She thought about her SEAL teammates, men and women whose names she couldn't even speak aloud, who were probably conducting operations at this very moment while she sat in a Portland jail cell accused of stolen valor. Most of all, she thought about the choice that had brought her here. She could have continued living the lie, maintaining her cover, protecting the classified nature of her service. But something inside her had finally broken under the weight of all that secrecy. She needed someone, somewhere, to know who she really was, even if proving it might destroy everything she had worked for. Outside her window, Portland slept on, unaware that one of its most invisible protectors was sitting in a jail cell, waiting to find out if truth was really more powerful than the lies we tell to protect it. The next morning brought chaos Sarah hadn't anticipated. Detective Rodriguez appeared at her cell around 7 a.m., his face grim and his manner more urgent than the night before. Ms. Mitchell, we have a problem. Sarah sat up on the narrow cot where she had spent a mostly sleepless night. What kind of problem? The media kind. Somehow word got out about your arrest. There are news vans outside, and your story is trending on social media. Through the small window, Sarah could indeed hear the distant sound of commotion beyond the station's walls. She closed her eyes, feeling a familiar knot of dread in her stomach. How bad is it? Rodriguez consulted his phone. Pretty bad. #stolen value is trending on Twitter. Someone filmed your arrest yesterday and posted it online. The video has over 2 million views. Sarah had known this was a possibility, but the reality still hit her like a physical blow. Everything she had worked for, every carefully constructed cover story and painstakingly built identity was crumbling in real time across the internet. Detective, did you make those calls I asked about? I did. That's actually part of the problem. Rodriguez pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. I called the FBI field office like you suggested. They transferred me around for about an hour before I finally got someone in counterterrorism who would talk to me. And they told me to hang up and pretend I never called. Then, about 20 minutes later, my captain gets a call from someone very high up in the federal food chain, telling him that this case is now a matter of national security. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, but also exactly what she had hoped for. Someone with the right clearance level was finally paying attention. What does that mean for me? It means federal agents are flying in from Washington, D.C. to take over the investigation. It means my captain is very nervous and very confused. And it means that either you're telling the truth about something so classified that it's making important people panic, or you've managed to stumble into the most elaborate stolen valor case in history. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Rodriguez stood quickly and stepped back from the cell. Two people appeared at the end of the corridor, a man and a woman in dark suits, both moving with the controlled precision that marked them as federal agents. They approached with the kind of intense focus that made the air feel electric. The woman was tall and sharp-featured, with prematurely grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her companion was shorter and stockier, with observant eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of their surroundings. Both wore the sort of unremarkable clothing that was specifically designed to be forgettable. "Detective Rodriguez?" the woman asked, though her attention was clearly focused on Sarah. "Yes, ma'am." "Agent Catherine Hayes, FBI Counterintelligence Division." "This is Agent David Park. We need to speak with Miss Mitchell privately." Rodriguez nodded and quickly left the area. Sarah watched the two agents approach his cell, trying to read their expressions. Hayes looked stern and professional, but Park's face showed something that might have been curiosity. "Miss Mitchell," Hayes said, "you've created quite a situation." "I told the truth. Sometimes that creates situations." Hayes pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be official documents. "According to our preliminary investigation, you don't exist in any standard military database. No service record, no training history, no deployment records." "That's correct." "You understand that claiming to be a Navy SEAL without proper credentials is a federal felony?" "I understand that, Agent Hayes. I also understand that my credentials exist at a classification level you may not have access to." Park stepped closer to the cell bars. "Ms. Mitchell, we've run your name through every database the FBI has access to. That includes classified systems that most people don't even know exist. You're not in any of them." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If the FBI couldn't find her records, then either her classification was even higher than she thought, or something had gone terribly wrong. "Agent Park, what clearance level are you operating at?" The two agents exchanged a glance. "Ms. Mitchell, we're going to need you to stop asking questions and stop providing answers. I'll answer any question you're authorized to ask. But first, I need to know if you've contacted Naval Special Warfare Group 1 at Coronado." "We've contacted everyone we need to contact," Hayes said curtly. "Have you spoken specifically with Admiral Patricia Hendricks?" Again, the agents exchanged looks. This time, Sarah caught something in their expressions that hadn't been there before. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. "How do you know Admiral Hendricks?" Park asked. "She was my commanding officer for 2 years. She personally recruited me for the program I'm currently assigned to." Hayes was typing rapidly on her tablet. "Ms. Mitchell, Admiral Hendricks has been dead for 6 months." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sat down heavily on the cot, her mind racing. Patricia Hendricks had been more than her commanding officer. She had been a mentor, almost a mother figure, during some of the darkest periods of Sarah's training. "How?" Sarah asked quietly. "Helicopter crashed during a training exercise in Virginia." "It was classified at the time, but she's definitely deceased." Sarah closed her eyes, processing this information. Admiral Hendricks had been her primary contact, the one person who knew the full scope of her assignments and her real identity. If she was gone, then Sarah's situation was even more precarious than she had realized. "Ms. Mitchell," Hayes continued, "we're going to need you to explain how you know about a dead admiral's classified activities. Because I served under her command. Because she recruited me personally for a program so classified that apparently even you don't have access to the records." Park leaned against the wall, studying Sarah's face. "Let's assume for a moment that you're telling the truth. If you're part of some ultra-classified program, why reveal yourself now? Why risk blowing your cover?" Sarah looked up at him, recognizing something in his tone that suggested he might be more open to believing her than his partner. "Because maintaining my cover was killing me. Because living a lie, even for national security, takes a toll that I couldn't sustain anymore. And because I thought there would be people who could verify my story without compromising ongoing operations. And now you're learning that those people might not exist anymore," Hayes said. "It appears that way." The three of them were quiet for a moment, each processing the implications of this conversation. Outside the station, Sarah could hear the growing sounds of media attention, car doors slamming, voices calling out questions, the distant hum of television crews setting up equipment. Hayes received a phone call and stepped away to answer it. Sarah watched as the agent's expression grew increasingly serious during the brief conversation. "We have a problem," Hayes said when she returned. "The story has gone national. CNN is running it, Fox News is covering it, and social media is exploding. The hashtag #FakeSeal is trending alongside #StolenValo." Park shook his head. "The internet has already decided you're guilty. There are veterans groups calling for maximum prosecution, and military bloggers are dissecting every detail of your claimed service record." Sarah felt the weight of public opinion crushing down on her. She had spent years operating in the shadows, where success was measured by how invisible she could remain. Now she was thrust into the harshest possible spotlight, accused of the one crime that would turn every veteran in America against her. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "We've been getting calls from various government agencies. CIA, NSA, Department of Defense. Everyone wants to know why a woman claiming to be a classified Navy SEAL is sitting in a Portland jail cell. What are they saying? Most of them are saying they've never heard of you. But a couple have asked us to stop investigating and transfer you to federal custody immediately." This was interesting. Sarah had expected complete denial from all official sources, but the fact that some agencies were asking for her transfer suggested that someone, somewhere, recognized her name. "Agent Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you believe I'm telling the truth?" Hayes considered the question for a long moment. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been investigating fraudsters and con artists for 15 years. I've seen every variation of stolen valor case you can imagine. People who claim to be Medal of Honor winners, former Green Berets, decorated Marines, they all have one thing in common, which is they want recognition. They want people to think they're heroes. They want the respect and admiration that comes with military service." Hayes paused, studying Sarah's face. "You don't seem to want any of that. If anything, you seem like you prefer to disappear entirely." Park nodded in agreement. "That's what's bothering me about this case. Most stolen valor cases involve people who are desperate for attention and validation, but you seem to actively avoid both." "Because I was trained to avoid both," Sarah said. "My entire operational philosophy is based on being invisible, unremarkable, forgettable. The last thing any covert operative wants is public recognition." Hayes received another phone call, this one longer and more intense than the first. Sarah watched as the agent's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, concern, and finally what looked like resignation.
"That was my supervisor in Washington,"
Hayes said after hanging up. "We're being pulled off this case." "What does that mean?" "It means that as of right now, your case is being transferred to a joint task force consisting of representatives from several agencies whose names I'm not allowed to mention." Park looked frustrated. "In 20 years with the Bureau, I've never seen anything like this. Cases don't get transferred to joint task forces unless they involve national security implications way beyond what appears on the surface." A new set of footsteps echoed down the corridor, these ones different from the FBI agents. Heavier, more deliberate, with the unmistakable cadence of military bearing. Sarah looked up to see a figure approaching that made her heart stop. The man walking toward her cell was tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. He wore civilian clothes, but his posture and bearing were unmistakably military. Most importantly, he wore something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Around his neck, barely visible beneath his shirt, was a thin chain. At the end of that chain, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that very few people in the world would recognize: a small, unremarkable piece of metal that looked like nothing special to most observers. But Sarah knew exactly what it was, and more importantly, what it meant. The man approached her cell and stood quietly for a moment, studying her face with intelligent grey eyes. Hayes and Park remained at a respectful distance, clearly recognizing that this man's authority superseded theirs. "Miss Mitchell," the man said finally, his voice carrying the weight of years of command, "I believe we need to have a conversation." Sarah stood and walked to the bars of her cell, her heart pounding. She looked at the man's face, then at the barely visible chain around his neck, then back to his eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "I wasn't sure if anyone would come." The man studied her for another long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his own small piece of metal, holding it where she could see it clearly. It was identical to the one he wore around his neck and identical to the one Sarah carried in her personal effects, currently sealed in a plastic bag somewhere in the Portland police station's evidence locker. "Only operatives carry," he said simply. The words hung in the air like a key turning in a lock. Sarah felt years of tension and fear begin to dissolve, replaced by a mixture of relief and apprehension about what would come next. Hayes stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Agent Hayes, FBI Counterintelligence.
Who are you, and what's your interest in this case? The man turned to look at her, and Sarah could see him making a decision about how much to reveal.
Agent Hayes, my name is General Marcus Webb. As of right now, this case falls under military jurisdiction.
Ms. Mitchell will be transferred to federal custody for debriefing and evaluation. Park frowned. General, we're going to need to see some official paperwork before we can authorize that transfer. General Webb reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be official documents with multiple signatures and seals. Everything you need is here. You'll find that the transfer has already been approved by your supervisors in Washington. As the agents reviewed the paperwork, Webb turned back to Sarah. His expression was unreadable, but she could see calculation behind his eyes. Ms. Mitchell, you've created quite a situation. Yes, sir, I realize that. The question now is whether we can resolve it in a way that protects both national security and your personal safety. The implications of his words weren't lost on Sarah. Her decision to reveal herself had consequences that extended far beyond her own fate. There were operations to consider, other operatives whose safety might be compromised, classified programs that could be exposed. Sir, I understand the complications I've created. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for my actions. Webb nodded slowly. We'll discuss that later. Right now, we need to get you out of here before this media circus gets any worse. As if summoned by his words, the sound of commotion from outside the station grew louder. Reporters were calling out questions, and Sarah could hear chanting that sounded like protesters had arrived. Ms. Mitchell, Webb continued, when we leave here, you're going to be walking into a firestorm of public opinion. The internet has already decided you're guilty. Veterans groups are calling for your prosecution. The military community sees you as someone who dishonored their service. I understand that, sir. Do you also understand that clearing your name might require revealing classified information that could compromise ongoing operations and put other operatives at risk? This was the heart of Sarah's dilemma, the impossible choice that had led her to this moment. To prove her innocence, she might have to betray the very secret she had sworn to protect. Yes, sir. I understand that too. Webb was quiet for a moment, considering options that Sarah could only guess at. Finally, he spoke again. Agent Hayes, is there a back entrance to this building? Yes, sir. But the media has crews positioned around the entire block. Then we'll have to go through the front. Ms. Mitchell, when we walk out of here, you say nothing to the reporters. No matter what they ask, no matter what accusations they make, you remain silent. Is that understood? Yes, sir. As the cell door opened for the first time in over 24 hours, Sarah felt like she was stepping from one life into another. Behind her lay the relative safety of anonymity and lies. Ahead waited a world where her deepest secrets might be exposed to protect a reputation that very few people would ever believe she deserved. But as she walked beside General Webb toward whatever came next, Sarah noticed something that gave her hope. He still wore that small piece of metal around his neck, the one that matched hers, the one that served as proof of truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Sometimes, the most important recognition comes not from the public, but from the quiet acknowledgement of those who understand what it really means to serve in the shadows. Only operatives carry. And now, finally, Sarah was no longer carrying her burden alone. The walk from the Portland police station to General Webb's waiting vehicle was the longest 100 yards of Sarah's life. The media presence outside was more intense than she had imagined possible. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the grey Oregon sky, like technological flowers seeking signal instead of sunlight. Reporters pressed against police barriers, shouting questions that cut through the morning air like accusations. Protesters had indeed arrived, some carrying signs that read, "Stolen valor is not victimless, and real heroes don't lie." Counter-protesters held their own signs, "Support our troops," and "Due process matters." Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead, following Webb's instructions to remain silent. But she couldn't block out the voices calling her name, the accusations being hurled from behind the barriers, the cameras documenting every step of her journey from the station to the black SUV waiting at the curb. Sarah Mitchell, did you really serve as a Navy SEAL? What do you say to the families of real SEALs who died in service? Are you mentally ill or just a fraud?
The words stung worse than Sarah had anticipated. She had faced enemy fire, survived torture training, and completed missions that would give most people nightmares.
But walking through this gauntlet of public judgment felt somehow more terrifying than anything she had experienced in combat. Webb opened the SUV's rear door and gestured for her to get inside. As she slid across the leather seat, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd of reporters. Jennifer, her sister, stood behind one of the barriers with tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met for just a moment before Webb closed the door, but that brief connection hit Sarah harder than all the shouted accusations combined. Jennifer looked confused and hurt. Exactly what Sarah would expect from someone whose sister had just been arrested for a crime that seemed to negate everything she thought she knew about her family. The worst part was that Sarah couldn't explain, couldn't tell Jennifer that everything would be okay, couldn't even acknowledge the pain she saw in her sister's face. The SUV pulled away from the curb, with its windows tinted dark enough to block the cameras but not the sound of the crowd. Sarah listened to the voices fade behind them as they drove through downtown Portland, heading toward an unknown destination. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. Webb was typing something on a secure-looking phone, but he glanced up to answer. "Classified facility outside the city. We need to have several very important conversations, and we need to have them somewhere that can't be monitored or infiltrated." The drive took them east of Portland, through increasingly rural areas that Sarah didn't recognize. They passed farms and forests, small towns that looked like they belonged in a different century. After about an hour, they turned onto a private road that wound through dense woods before emerging at what appeared to be a corporate retreat center. The building was modern but unremarkable, the kind of place that could host business conferences or government meetings without attracting attention. Security was present but subtle. Cameras hidden among the trees, guards who looked like maintenance workers, barriers that appeared decorative but were clearly functional. Inside, the facility felt more like a luxury hotel than a government installation. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and artwork that suggested money had been spent on creating an environment where important conversations could happen without stress or distraction. Webb led Sarah to a conference room with windows overlooking a small lake. The view was peaceful, almost pastoral, which seemed incongruous given the circumstances that had brought them there. "Mitchell, please have a seat. Can I offer you coffee, water, something to eat?" The adrenaline and stress of the last 36 hours had suppressed her appetite, but now she felt suddenly hungry and exhausted. Coffee would be good. "Thank you." Webb pressed a button on an intercom system, and within minutes, a woman appeared with a tray containing coffee, sandwiches, and fresh fruit. She placed it on the conference table and left without speaking. "Before we begin," Webb said, pouring coffee for both of them, "I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded for security purposes. But these recordings are classified at the highest levels and will only be seen by people with appropriate clearances." Sarah nodded and took a sip of coffee. It was excellent, which somehow made everything feel slightly more surreal. "General Webb, before we discuss anything else, I need to know, am I under arrest?" "Not exactly. You're in protective custody while we sort out this situation. The charges against you in Portland will be dropped, but your status going forward depends on several factors we need to discuss." Webb opened a leather folder and spread several documents across the table. Sarah could see official letterhead from multiple government agencies, classification markings, and what appeared to be psychological evaluations. "Ms. Mitchell, let's start with the basics. Tell me about your recruitment into the program." Sarah set down her coffee and composed her thoughts. For the first time in days, she was going to tell the complete truth to someone authorized to hear it. "It started during my final year at the University of Oregon. I was studying international relations and linguistics, with a focus on Middle Eastern languages. I was also competing in triathlon and martial arts at a fairly high level. How were you approached?" "My Arabic professor, Dr. Hassan, recommended me for what he described as a government internship program. I thought it was with the State Department, or maybe CIA. I had no idea it was military at first." Webb made notes as she spoke. "Continue." "The initial interviews were conducted by people who claimed to be from various civilian agencies. It wasn't until I was several months into the process that I learned I was being recruited for a classified Navy program that didn't officially exist." "When did you meet Admiral Hendricks?" Sarah felt a pang of grief at the mention of her former commanding officer. "About 6 months into the recruitment process." She explained that they were developing a new type of special operations unit, one that would focus on deep cover intelligence gathering rather than direct action missions. "And you agreed to join this unit?" "I was 23 years old, fluent in 4 languages, and convinced I was going to change the world. Of course I agreed. Webb smiled slightly. Admiral Hendricks had a talent for finding idealistic young people and channeling their energy into useful purposes.
You knew her?
Patricia Hendricks recruited me into my first classified assignment 25 years ago. She had a gift for seeing potential in people that others missed. This revelation made Sarah feel less alone somehow. The program that had shaped her life hadn't been created in isolation. It was part of a larger tradition of service that she was only now beginning to understand. Tell me about your training, Webb continued. It started with traditional SEAL training at Coronado, Bud/S, advanced combat skills, underwater demolition. But there were additional components that most SEALs don't receive, such as advanced linguistics, cultural immersion, psychological profiling, long-term cover identity development. I spent 6 months learning to be 3 different people: an aid worker, a graduate student, and a freelance journalist. Each identity had complete backstories, documented histories, and psychological profiles. Webb nodded. The program was designed to create operatives who could embed in foreign populations for extended periods without being detected. Exactly. Traditional special forces are designed for short-duration, high-intensity operations. We were trained for long-duration, low-visibility intelligence gathering. And your missions? Sarah hesitated. Even in this secure environment, discussing specific operations felt like crossing a line she had been trained never to cross. General, how much detail can I provide? Webb consulted his documents. Given the circumstances, you're authorized to discuss general mission parameters, but not specific targets, locations, or outcomes. I conducted 3 major assignments over 4 years. Each lasted between 8 and 18 months. I gathered intelligence on terrorist networks, weapons trafficking operations, and foreign intelligence services. My cover identities allowed me to access information that traditional military or intelligence assets couldn't reach. And during this time, your official military record was classified at levels that made you essentially invisible to standard databases. That's correct. According to most systems, I didn't exist. My pay came through classified channels, my medical records were compartmentalized, and my personnel file was accessible only to people with specific code words. Webb was quiet for a moment, reviewing his notes. Miss Mitchell, you should know that we've spent the last 24 hours conducting an extensive investigation into your claims. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. And? We've verified your service record through classified channels. We've confirmed your training completion, your mission assignments, and your operational history. Everything you've told us is accurate. The relief that washed over Sarah was so intense it was almost painful. For days, she had wondered if somehow her entire military career had been erased, or if she had been abandoned by the system she had served. However, Webb continued, we have a significant problem. Sarah's relief faded quickly. What kind of problem? The media attention around your case has made it impossible to maintain the classified nature of your service. There are too many people asking too many questions. Congressional representatives are demanding investigations. Veterans groups are calling for transparency. What does that mean for the program? Webb's expression grew grave. It means the program is being shut down. All current operations are being terminated and all operatives are being recalled. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Other people whose names she didn't even know, were having their lives turned upside down because of her decision to reveal herself. General, how many other operatives are affected? 17 currently in the field, and about 30 who have completed assignments and are living undercover identities in civilian life. Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the scope of the consequences. 47 people whose lives were being disrupted because she couldn't maintain her cover any longer. Miss Mitchell, I want you to understand something important. The decision to shut down the program isn't being made because of your actions. It's being made because the program had become operationally unsustainable. Sarah looked up at him. What do you mean? Over the past 18 months, we've lost 3 operatives. Not killed in action, but psychologically broken by the strain of maintaining deep cover for extended periods. Admiral Hendricks was actually in the process of recommending program modifications when she died. This was news to Sarah. She had assumed that her own struggles with maintaining her cover identity were a personal weakness, not a systemic problem. The program was asking too much of its operatives. Webb continued, living multiple lives, maintaining constant deception, operating without support networks for years at a time. It was creating psychological casualties that we couldn't justify. So the program was already in trouble before my arrest? Yes. Your situation simply accelerated a decision that was probably inevitable. Webb pulled out another document, this one marked with red classification stamps. Ms. Mitchell, we have several options for your future, but each one comes with significant trade-offs. What are my options? Option 1. We maintain that you're suffering from a psychological disorder that caused you to believe you were a Navy SEAL. We provide you with medical treatment and a disability discharge, but your service record remains classified forever. That would mean living with people thinking I'm mentally ill and a fraud. Yes. Option 2. We partially declassify your service record, enough to prove that you served in special operations, but not enough to reveal specific program details or mission parameters. What's the downside of option 2? It would still expose classified information and could potentially compromise other operatives or ongoing operations run by different agencies. Sarah felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders again. What's option 3? Webb was quiet for a long moment. Option 3 is the most complicated. We tell the truth. The complete truth? We declassify the existence of the program, acknowledge that it recruited and trained operatives like you, and provide enough details to validate your service without compromising operational security. That sounds like the best option. What's the catch? The catch is that it would require congressional hearings, public testimony, and media attention that would permanently end any possibility of you returning to covert operations. You would become the public face of a classified program, which means your life as a secret operative would be completely over. Sarah considered this. The idea of testifying before Congress and facing continued media scrutiny was terrifying. But the alternative, living forever under suspicion of being a fraud or mentally ill, seemed worse. General, what would happen to the other operatives if we chose option 3? They would be given similar choices. Some might choose to remain classified and accept cover stories. Others might join you in going public. It would be up to each individual. Sarah thought about her sister Jennifer standing in the crowd outside the police station with tears on her face. She thought about all the veterans who were calling her a fraud, people who had genuinely served their country and deserved to know that she had served too. She thought about the other operatives whose lives were being disrupted, whether she remained silent or spoke out. General Webb, if I choose option 3, if I agree to go public, what guarantee do I have that the government will support my testimony? You have my word, and the word of several senior officials whose names I can't mention. But you're right to be concerned. Government support can be withdrawn if political circumstances change. Sarah stood and walked to the window overlooking the lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the overcast sky like a mirror. She thought about all the reflections and false identities she had worn over the years and how exhausting it had become to never be able to show her true face. I have a question about something else, Sarah said, turning back to Webb. When you arrived at the jail, you said only operatives carry. What did that mean? Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out the small piece of metal he had shown her earlier. In the light of the conference room, Sarah could see it more clearly. It was unremarkable in appearance, just a small disc with some scratches that might have been random wear or might have been intentional markings. Every operative in your program was given one of these during their final training phase. It's made from metal taken from a decommissioned submarine that served in classified operations during the Cold War. There are exactly 57 of them in existence. What's their purpose? Recognition. In situations where normal identification couldn't be used, where operational security prevented normal verification, these served as proof of membership in the program. Sarah remembered receiving hers. Remembered Admiral Hendricks explaining that it was both an honor and a responsibility. She had carried it through every mission, through every moment of doubt and fear. Admiral Hendricks told me it was a promise, Sarah said. A promise of what? That no matter how deep my cover, no matter how lost I became in other identities, there would always be people who knew who I really was. Webb nodded. Patricia was always good with symbolism. But in your case, that promise has become complicated.
Because proving who I really am might endanger other people.
Exactly. Sarah returned to her seat and looked directly at Webb. General, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly.
In your professional opinion, what's the right choice? Webb set down his coffee and leaned back in his chair. Ms. Mitchell, I've been in special operations for over 30 years. I've seen good people make impossible choices under circumstances that had no clear right answers. That's not really an answer. No, it's not. Because ultimately, this isn't a decision I can make for you. But I will tell you this. The program you served in was important. The intelligence you gathered saved lives and protected American interests. Your service was real, it was valuable, and it was honorable. But the cost of that service, both to you and to other operatives, may have been too high. Sometimes the most courageous choice is admitting that a mission has become unsustainable. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing everything Webb had told her. Outside the window, the still lake reflected a sky that seemed to be clearing, patches of blue beginning to show through the grey clouds. General, if I choose to go public, what happens next? We spend the next several days preparing your testimony. We coordinate with congressional leaders and media representatives. We develop a narrative that validates your service while protecting ongoing operations. And then you step in front of cameras and tell the world who you really are. And if I choose to remain classified? We develop a medical cover story, provide you with treatment for alleged psychological issues, and you live the rest of your life knowing that people believe you're either mentally ill or a fraud. The choice, when stated so directly, seemed obvious, but Sarah knew that obvious choices often had hidden complications. Can I have some time to think about it? You can have until tomorrow morning. After that, the situation becomes more difficult to manage. As if summoned by their conversation reaching a natural pause, there was a soft knock on the conference room door. The same woman who had brought coffee earlier entered and whispered something to Webb. Miss Mitchell, there's someone here who wants to see you. Who? Your sister. Sarah felt her heart stop. Jennifer? How did she find me here? We contacted her. She's been worried sick, and she deserves to know that you're safe. But she doesn't have clearance for any of this information. Webb stood and gathered his documents. Which means you'll have to decide what to tell her. That conversation might help you figure out what you want to tell the rest of the world. A few minutes later, Jennifer Mitchell walked into the conference room, and Sarah saw her sister clearly for the first time in over 4 years. Jennifer looked older, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when Sarah left for her first assignment. Her nurse's uniform had been replaced by civilian clothes, and she moved with the careful composure of someone who was trying very hard not to fall apart. Sarah? The two sisters looked at each other across the room, separated by years of secrets and lies and carefully constructed distances that had been necessary for operational security but devastating for family relationships. Hi, Jen. Jennifer crossed the room quickly and wrapped Sarah in a hug that felt like coming home after a very long journey. Sarah held onto her sister and felt tears she had been holding back for days finally begin to fall. I don't understand what's happening, Jennifer whispered. The news is saying terrible things about you, but they don't make sense. You work as a translator. You've never been in the military. Sarah pulled back to look at her sister's face. Jen, I need to tell you something. But I need you to promise me that no matter what I say, you'll remember that I love you, and that everything I did was to keep you safe. Jennifer's expression grew concerned. Sarah, you're scaring me. I know, but I need you to know the truth, even if it's hard to believe. Sarah took a deep breath and began to tell her sister the real story of the last 4 years. She explained about the recruitment, the training, the missions that had taken her to places Jennifer had never known she visited. She talked about the weight of maintaining cover stories and the isolation of living multiple lives. Jennifer listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally a kind of understanding that came from recognizing truths that explained years of small inconsistencies and unexplained absences. So, when you missed Christmas last year, I was in Syria, gathering intelligence on a weapons trafficking network. And, when you couldn't come to Mum's funeral, I was in Eastern Europe, embedded with a terrorist cell, planning attacks on American installations. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, processing revelations that recontextualized their entire relationship. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? Because knowing would have put you in danger. Because the deeper my cover became, the more I had to distance myself from everyone I cared about. Because I thought I was protecting you. But you weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. I spent 4 years thinking my sister was distant and uncaring. I thought you didn't want to be part of our family anymore. The pain in Jennifer's voice cut deeper than any physical wound Sarah had ever received. She had been so focused on the operational necessity of maintaining her cover that she hadn't fully considered the emotional cost to the people who loved her. Jen, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that staying away from you was the hardest part of every mission. Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. What happens now? I have to decide whether to tell the world the truth or continue living with people thinking I'm a fraud. That's not really a choice, Sarah. You can't live the rest of your life as a lie. But telling the truth might put other people in danger. Jennifer took her sister's hands. Sarah, you've been putting yourself in danger for 4 years to protect other people. Maybe it's time to let other people help protect you. As Sarah looked into her sister's eyes, she realized that Jennifer was right. The isolation and secrecy that had been necessary for her missions had become a prison that was no longer serving any useful purpose. Jen, if I do this, if I go public, it's going to be incredibly difficult. There will be more media attention, congressional hearings, people who will never believe me no matter what evidence is presented. Then we'll face it together, the way families are supposed to. The simple offer of support, the promise that she wouldn't have to face the consequences alone, made Sarah's decision clear. When General Webb returned to the conference room an hour later, he found the two sisters sitting together, talking quietly about plans for the future.
General, Sarah said, standing to face him, I've made my decision. And? I choose option 3. I'm going to tell the truth. Webb nodded, as if he had expected this choice.
Are you prepared for what that means? No. But I'm tired of being prepared for everything. I'm tired of having contingency plans and backup identities and exit strategies. I want to try living as myself for a while. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Webb smiled. Admiral Hendricks would be proud of you. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell sat in a congressional hearing room, facing a panel of senators and a gallery filled with reporters, veterans, and family members. The hearing was being broadcast live on multiple networks, and social media was following every word. The previous weeks had been exactly as difficult as Webb had predicted. Media scrutiny, death threats from people who still believed she was a fraud, and the constant stress of being a public figure when she had been trained to be invisible. But there had been positive developments too. Other operatives from her program had chosen to join her in going public, creating a chorus of voices that validated each other's experiences. Veterans groups, after reviewing the declassified evidence of her service, had publicly apologized and welcomed her into their community. Most importantly, she had been able to rebuild her relationship with Jennifer and begin processing years of grief and isolation. Ms. Mitchell, the committee chairwoman said, in your own words, please tell us about your service to this country. Sarah looked out at the gallery and saw Jennifer sitting in the front row, offering encouragement with her smile. She saw General Webb near the back, wearing his small piece of metal on a chain that was now visible outside his shirt. She saw other operatives from her program, people she had worked with but never been able to acknowledge. Senators, my name is Sarah Mitchell.
I am a Navy SEAL, and for the past 4 years I have served my country in classified operations designed to gather intelligence and protect American lives. As she began to tell her story, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the freedom that comes from finally being able to tell the truth. Outside the hearing room, across the country and around the world, people watched and listened as one woman's choice to stop living a lie helped expose both the necessity and the cost of the secrets we keep in the name of national security. Some would believe her testimony. Others would remain skeptical forever. But Sarah had learned something important in that Portland jail cell weeks earlier. The most important recognition doesn't come from strangers or the general public. It comes from the people who know who you really are and choose to stand beside you anyway. Only operatives carry certain truths. But sometimes, sharing the weight of those truths makes them easier to bear.